Inside a dark chamber of the Temple of Hathor in Dendera, deep in the heart of Egypt, there exists a stone relief carved more than 2,000 years ago that defies any conventional explanation. What you see there, etched with precision into the walls of this ancient temple, feels impossible. It looks like a gigantic electric light bulb, complete with what appears to be an internal filament, an elongated glass-like bulb, and even a cable connected to a box that looks disturbingly similar to a power source. But that's absurd, right? Ancient Egypt had no electricity. They lived thousands of years before any understanding of electrical current, generators, or circuits. So why does this image exist? And more importantly, why does it resemble technology that wouldn't officially be invented until the 19th century? Let's step back in time and understand exactly where we are. The Temple of Hathor at Dendera was built during the Ptolemaic period between 54 and 20 BCE, although there is strong evidence that the site had been sacred for much longer, possibly since the Old Kingdom. Hathor was the goddess of love, joy, music, and motherhood, one of the most revered deities in the Egyptian pantheon. The temple dedicated to her is an architectural masterpiece, with massive columns, elaborate astronomical ceilings, and reliefs covering nearly every inch of its interior walls. But it is within a specific crypt, a subterranean chamber accessible only by narrow stairways and tight corridors, that we find the most intriguing reliefs. These crypts were used to store sacred objects, temple treasures, and important religious texts. And on their walls are a series of images that official Egyptology interprets as purely mythological, but which, to modern eyes, appear to be something entirely different. The most famous relief depicts what looks like a large, elongated bulb, inside of which a serpent undulates from one end to the other. This object rests on what resembles an electrical insulator, strikingly similar to the ceramic insulators used in modern power transmission lines. Attached to the base is what appears to be a cable, extending toward a rectangular box beside a seated figure holding objects often described as knives or ritual tools, though some suggest they could represent controls or conductors. The resemblance to an electric lamp, specifically a Crookes tube, is unsettlingly precise. The Crookes tube was invented by English physicist William Crookes in 1875. It is essentially an evacuated glass tube with electrodes at each end. When high-voltage electricity passes through it, it produces a luminous glow caused by the ionization of residual gases inside the tube. This device was a direct precursor to modern fluorescent lighting and even the cathode ray tubes used in early televisions. When you place an image of a Crookes tube beside the Dendera relief, the similarities are undeniable. The elongated shape, the internal glow-like form, even the support structure at the base. According to official academic interpretation, the relief represents the mythological creation of the world in Egyptian cosmology. The serpent inside the bulb is said to be Harsamtus, a manifestation of the god Horus, emerging from a lotus flower as a symbol of birth and renewal. The supporting pillar is interpreted as a Djed, a symbol of stability associated with Osiris. The human figures are believed to be performing religious rituals, and the entire scene is considered symbolic, with no connection to physical technology. But there's a problem with this explanation, one that conventional Egyptologists rarely address in depth. If you explore Egypt's pyramids and temples, especially those with deep internal chambers and long corridors stretching dozens of meters underground, you'll notice something remarkable. There are no soot marks on the ceilings. None. Think about that for a moment. The ancient Egyptians created incredibly detailed artwork on the walls and ceilings of tunnels and chambers that are buried in complete darkness. The reliefs are exquisitely detailed, the hieroglyphs precisely carved, the paintings applied with extraordinary accuracy. How did they accomplish this in absolute darkness? The standard explanation is that they used torches, oil lamps, or mirror systems to reflect sunlight from the outside into the chambers. But here's the issue. Torches and oil lamps produce soot, a lot of it. Anyone who has burned a candle in an enclosed room knows how quickly carbon residue accumulates. Now imagine hundreds of workers over years or decades, constantly using open flames in confined underground spaces while carving and painting. The ceilings should be coated in black soot, but they aren't. In chambers like those within the Great Pyramid of Giza, which extend deep underground, the ceilings are clean, pristine, as if combustion never occurred there at all. The mirror theory also has serious limitations. To illuminate corridors that bend, descend, and extend dozens of meters underground would require an incredibly complex system of perfectly aligned mirrors, and even then, the loss of light would be immense. And many chambers were sealed after construction, with no direct access to external sunlight. How were those spaces worked in? This is where the theory of ancient artificial lighting begins to make sense, radical as it may sound. And Dendera isn't the only place pointing in this direction. There are other clues throughout Egypt suggesting the ancients may have had access to some form of electrical technology that has since been lost or deliberately forgotten. Let's talk about the Great Pyramid of Giza because it sits at the center of this theory. The official narrative tells us it was built as a tomb for Pharaoh Khufu around 2560 BCE. But there are several issues with that explanation. First, no mummy or definitive burial evidence has ever been found inside the Great Pyramid. Second, the construction is far too complex for a simple tomb. The mathematical and astronomical precision embedded in the structure goes far beyond what would be necessary for a funerary monument. And third, there are internal features that make little sense if the sole purpose was to house a body. An alternative theory, proposed by engineers and physicists who have studied the pyramid, suggests it functioned as a type of power plant, not nuclear or combustion-based, but something far more elegant and natural. This theory is rooted in the phenomenon of piezoelectricity, the ability of certain materials to generate electrical current when subjected to mechanical pressure. The granite used extensively inside the Great Pyramid contains quartz crystals, which are piezoelectric. Massive quantities of granite stacked under enormous pressure, constantly compressed by the weight of the structure itself. Add to this the fact that the pyramid sits atop an underground aquifer, where moving water under pressure could also contribute to electrical generation. Some researchers suggest that the king's chamber and the relieving chambers above it were designed to amplify vibrations and pressure, creating a resonant effect that maximized piezoelectric output. If this theory is correct, the Great Pyramid was not a tomb. It was a machine designed to generate electrical energy, which could then be distributed and used for lighting, tools, or purposes we can scarcely imagine. And if that's true, then the Dendera relief isn't mythology, it's a technical diagram. A stone-carved instruction manual showing how lighting devices powered by this energy were used. There are other intriguing details that support this idea. In 1936, archaeologists near Baghdad uncovered artifacts now known as the Baghdad Batteries, small clay jars containing copper cylinders and iron rods, dated roughly between 250 BCE and 250 CE. When tested, scientists found that when filled with an electrolyte like vinegar or lemon juice, these objects function as primitive batteries, producing about 1 to 2 volts of electricity. If ancient civilizations in the Middle East possessed the knowledge to create basic batteries, why is it impossible to imagine that the Egyptians, with their advanced mathematics, impressive engineering, and sophisticated metallurgy, developed more advanced methods of generating and using electricity? Especially considering Egypt's extensive cultural exchanges with Mediterranean and Near Eastern civilizations over thousands of years. There are also compelling historical accounts. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder, in his first-century work Naturalis Historia, describes perpetual lamps that burned endlessly in certain ancient temples. These lamps were considered magical or divine, but Pliny notes specific physical characteristics, such as never consuming fuel or requiring maintenance. Could these be distorted descriptions of electrical devices the Romans didn't fully understand? St. Augustine, writing in the 4th century, also mentions a lamp in the Temple of Venus that could not be extinguished by wind or water. He attributed it to demonic power, but it may simply have been a protected electrical device. Numerous ancient texts reference lights that burned eternally without visible fuel, descriptions that make far more sense as electric lamps than as supernatural flames. Of course, mainstream science rejects these interpretations. Physicists argue there is no evidence the Egyptians understood electromagnetism or possessed the metallurgical capability to create effective conductors and insulators. Archaeologists point out that no confirmed electrical lamps, copper wiring arranged as circuits, or other definitive technological artifacts have been found. But what if those artifacts were made of perishable materials that didn't survive the passage of time? What if the knowledge was so specialized it was restricted to a small elite of priests or engineers, and that lineage vanished when Egypt declined? What if the knowledge itself was deliberately hidden or destroyed at some point in history? The idea of lost knowledge isn't as far-fetched as it seems. We know the Library of Alexandria, the greatest repository of knowledge in the ancient world, was destroyed through multiple fires over centuries. Hundreds of thousands of manuscripts, including scientific, mathematical, and engineering works from civilizations across the known world, were lost forever. Who knows what technological secrets were recorded there? What instruction manuals, diagrams, or scientific treatises turned to ash? The Dendera relief may be one of the few surviving clues of knowledge that was systematically erased. Perhaps it survived not by accident, but because it was hidden within a crypt, protected from conquerors, looters, and those who sought to destroy ancient knowledge to replace it with new narratives. There's also the cultural context to consider. The Egyptians were obsessed with preserving knowledge. They recorded everything in hieroglyphs, created elaborate religious texts, and maintained meticulous astronomical records. If they possessed advanced technology, it makes sense they would document it, especially in temples and sacred spaces guarded by priests. The fact that we interpret these records as mythology doesn't mean they are purely symbolic. We may be looking at technical manuals through the wrong cultural lens. Imagine how a historian thousands of years in the future might interpret our symbols if all modern technology disappeared. A Wi-Fi icon could be seen as divine waves radiating from a sacred point. A circuit diagram might look like a ritual maze. Without technological context, even our most precise instructions would appear mystical and incomprehensible. Perhaps that's exactly what we're doing with ancient Egypt. Perhaps we're dismissing technical diagrams as mythology because we can't accept that an ancient civilization might have developed technology we only rediscovered millennia later. The Dendera relief remains there, carved in stone, defying explanation. The chambers of the pyramids remain free of soot, whispering of lighting methods we don't understand. And we continue trying to force these anomalies into narratives that fit what we've been taught about the linear progression of human technology. But maybe history isn't linear. Maybe ancient civilizations reached technological heights that were later lost, perhaps multiple times throughout human history. Maybe progress isn't a straight line upward, but a cycle of rise and collapse, discovery and forgetting, illumination and darkness. And maybe, just maybe, that image in Dendera is exactly what it appears to be: a lamp, a lost technology, a fragment of a world that once existed and vanished, leaving behind stone-carved clues, waiting for the day we finally remember what our ancestors already knew.